The cloud. Hi, I'm Tom Mihawk, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Andre Pratte. I teach personal finance at the graduate and undergrad level at several universities. Andre was a student of mine in the MBA program at University of Massachusetts in the Eisenberg School. And you meet so many fascinating people in these programs. And Andre's got a fascinating background. He'll bring to us, I think, some depth of both understanding and thought about personal finance that um, all of us should really think about. It reflects a lifetime, if I may, Andre, say a lifetime of experience. And I think from that comes the depth and the color that you'll find fascinating. Andre was a journalist for 40 years in Canada, most of the time covering national politics and managing newsrooms. He was chief editorial writer at La Presse, Canada's foremost French language newspaper, for 15 years. I don't know if I hope we'll have international viewers of this podcast too, but in the US, 15 years anywhere is a long time. So I congratulate you, Andre. And what little I know about journalism and newsrooms and ownership of media properties tells me that I'm sure you had your fair share of ups and downs during that time. So double congratulations. In addition, he was appointed to the Canadian Senate. And in 2016, he stayed for 3.5 years. He resigned in 2019 for personal and political reasons. He's written several books. I've written one, forgive me. I'm going to pitch it quickly. It's called Optimize Your Resume. And one way I came to know Andre too, is he purchased my book. Thank you very much. And wrote a wonderful review for me. Um, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised at the quality of the review, given that he spent his career in journalism. He's a very good writer, and I'm grateful for that, and all the other reviews and book purchases I've had. But he's written several books and has plans for more. Andre, by the way, he's coming to us from Montreal, which is another fascinating element of this discussion. So in our preparation yesterday, we talked about a couple of things. I don't want to jump to that yet. I wonder if you would be kind enough just to say a little bit about how personal finance has impacted you, what motivated you to take the grad MBA personal finance course. Do you have any early recollections of parents or family or siblings talking about budgets or saving or investing? And maybe just kick us off with some of those early experiences with personal finance, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, it was a pleasure having your course, and I plan to follow more. And one reason is that although I've managed our family finances for as long as I can remember, I've never had any training or really scientific approach to it. I did it by instinct more than anything else, and we'll talk about that a bit later. And I felt the need really as retirement approaches, and I have to plan. How much money we need to have the lifestyle that we would like to have, and what should I do with the little money we've accumulated through the years. I felt the need to have more knowledge, that instinct was not enough anymore, that I needed, really an approach, a logical and as I said, scientific approach. So which is what brought me to your series of courses. One interesting thing is that I'm a French Canadian, and I was born in Quebec City in a bourgeois family in Quebec City. And French Canadians, for many, many, many decades, did not talk about money. Money was something that, you made money or you didn't make any. Most French Canadians didn't make a lot of money, but it's something you didn't talk about. For some, we're Catholics, I guess maybe that's part of it.
It was a cultural issue.
It was a cultural issue. So that and people who made money, the few French Canadians who made money, many of them because they went to the States, south, and made a fortune there and came back, were seen as as if they had done something that was not legitimate. You know, you were not supposed to make that much money as a business person, for instance.
And Andre, as you know, everyone in the US makes lots and lots of money.
Right, right. So, so anyways, it was something you didn't talk about, and therefore managing you know, even taking courses if you were young in to help you manage money was just something you didn't do, which is partly why I guess I was so ignorant at the way I approached personal finance. But one thing that is culturally important is that we learned that money was a rare commodity, that you didn't spend it without thinking. You had to be careful. You had to save as much as you could, and these were the rules, if you wish, that really drove the way I managed the family's finances for over 40 years. You know, be careful, save as much as you can. Do not spend thriftily. You just need to be very careful, and don't uh, try to keep your debt at a reasonable level. And in fact, try to you know, take as fewer loans as possible and just spend the money that you have, and that be content with that. So these were rules or principles or approaches, even cultural approaches, as you said, rather than a scientific logical approach like what you teach.
Sure. Tell us, if you don't mind, reveal whatever you want, because I think it's a personal financial planning um, timeline. It's a time related issue. Why you're talking to us from a room with boxes and empty shelves?
Yeah, well, we just moved, as is, I guess is obvious, from our house in a suburb of Montreal to a place closer to the city, a condo closer to the city. And yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough that I never really looked for a job. I mean, I came out of university. I had decided that I wanted to be a journalist, and I found a small part-time job in a radio station here in Montreal, and it just went on from there. Right, I started working part-time as a student at that radio station, and when I finished university, I eventually got a full-time job at that radio station, and then I moved to the newspaper La Presse, where I stayed for more than 30 years. So I was extremely lucky. It's something that happens less and less today, that you can stay with the same safe employer for 30 years. Uh, but I didn't in the early days. I didn't make much money, but I still had the same approach. I never really spent more than I had, and I tried to save as much as I could. And we can see the results of that now. You know, the impact of compounded interest and reinvesting the little dividends that you make in stocks after 30 years makes an incredible difference. You have a bit of money, and you're not. I'm not wealthy by any standards, but uh, we have accumulated enough money. You know, by putting a bit on the side each year, that we can now consider retiring at 65 or 66 or whatever. I'm 64 now, and maybe spend quality time together with my wife. I've been with my wife 41 years, and
Congratulations. That's an achievement.
yeah, yeah, I think you've been married for a long while too, right, Tom?
35.
Yeah, so good for you. Congratulations,
Thank you.
and congratulations to our wives actually, who
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I'm not sure who it's more of an achievement for, me or my wife.
Yeah. So, anyways, I mean, you know, you hear that when you're young, that it makes a difference if you put a bit of money aside each year, and use the power of compounded interest and reinvest your dividends rather than having them deposited in your bank account. And but after 30, 40 years, you do see the impact of that, right?
Andre, it makes me think about, I sometimes, this is not so much for undergrads who I teach also, who don't have so much experience, but this kind of thing comes up more with grad students who are smart, who are beginning to make money. And they say to me, I mean, this only happened just in the last month. And of course I was teaching, and they want to know how much digital currency they should own, or when they should, how much cash they should have, or when they should be in or out of the market. And I tell them, and I realize you haven't yet taken my investments course, which I pitched you on before we started recording. But I tell them, I tell them this. I had my most affluent client ever, $250 million net worth, selling his company. Smart man, smart wife, interesting man, well-traveled, homes on several continents. And he was taking his cash interests when his company was sold. He was receiving LLC interests, which were not liquid. And then his deal agreement was that every year, 20% was liquidated. So over 5 years, it was all liquidated. And he would invest these in his liquidated portions in Vanguard index funds. And I'd say to him, Steve, why do you invest in Vanguard index funds? Your business, he was an investment manager. Your business is using stochastic calculus to take advantage of market volatility. He would say, Tom, you know what? I can pick an active manager that beats the market this year, but they may not beat the market next year. And so I want to get the best return I can get, the average of the market, and keep my fees down. And so what I tell these sort of smarter grad students who've begun to make some money, I say, your biggest pool of your investments be with a bias towards stocks for greater gains over the long term, with a bias toward lower expenses. If you're in a 401k plan and you see year after year an active fund that on a net basis beats the index funds, great, pick it. It's okay. But investing, and you can't all invest everything for the long term. Some of your money, if you're going to go back to law school, or you're going to get married soon, or have children that you have tuitions for. But I just wonder if you would mind elaborating just a little bit on the impact of this long-term investing, taking advantage of time, making prudent choices, aiming your investments in the direction of, the things that are going to help you for the long term, which is, I sense, was what you're saying.
Yeah. So, well, at the beginning, you don't have much money to right? You don't. So I didn't invest in stocks until I guess I was something like 40. Before that, I just put my money, and interest rates were higher than they were today. So you had options in, bonds and things like that, government bonds, and which is what I did. Very safe, very prudent, but the interest rates were interesting. When I decided to start investing in stocks, the first thing I did was to get a financial advisor, someone whom I knew by family ties that I could trust. And the advice I got from him, which I followed, and I'm glad I followed, was for the long term, you better invest in dividend stocks. And and reinvest your dividends in the stocks as time goes by, and keep one part. If you want to have fun with the market and try to beat the market, right, make it a small part of right, exactly, of
Because you're
what you invest.
competing with experts who themselves don't even beat the market every day.
That's right. So I a couple of years ago, my financial gold was going up last year. I think last year gold was going up. And I told my financial advisor, I think maybe I should invest a bit of money in gold. He said, no, not a good idea for different reasons. So he was against it. And I thought, well, okay, he's against it, but I'll do it. So I'll put a bit of money into gold.
After all, you are the client.
What I did in secret, he doesn't know. If he listens to this podcast, he'll learn that. So I did it on the side. It was not a lot of money, but gold has been going down since then, which is very typical of lots of things that I decided, which is why I have a financial advisor. And I know that he's a prudent person. He knows my approach to risk. I mean, I have at this point probably my savings is about 60% stocks and 40% bonds, government bonds and company bonds.
And that's
But
right where, given the age you mentioned before, that's right about what the academicians would say you should do.
yeah, and
Not everyone does, but that's what they say
no,
you should do.
yeah, and I'm in the process now. I'm also managing my mother's finances. My mother is 99 years old,
God bless her.
and
Right.
she's got a little bit of money. And so for the last 20 years, we've been slowly transferring money from stocks to bonds because we know that at her age, her spending has gone down considerably, and if there's a market correction, which could happen, well, which the experts have been announcing for a couple of years and doesn't never happens, but it will happen eventually. We know that, right? So at her age, if there's a huge market correction, she won't have time to win back the losses that she will make. So we're transferring her money very gradually, but now most of it, I'd say 80% is in bonds and things like that, even though interest rates are very low. We believe that's the right strategy. And eventually, I guess when I come to 70 or something like that, we'll do the same for me, which would be probably the prudent approach.
What's so challenging is, you know, diversification protects you. It gives you an opportunity to earn more for the standard portfolio or go down less for maybe a more aggressive portfolio that could go up more when times are good. Diversification by and large is good, but it retards your returns. And if you were to talk to someone like Warren Buffett, he's quoted as saying, no, 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 don't diversify. Own a very small pool of things and watch them very carefully. Now,
Mm,
Warren Buffett has access, I think, to information that the average person doesn't have. He would have you believe that he sits around and reads, prospectuses all day long and financial statements, and he probably does, but he has access to other information. But we know academically, financially, that the best thing to do 30 years ago would be to buy, or 25, buy Amazon and only own that. But you would have waited 20 years to realize that you'd made the right decision. And for 20 years, you would have thought you made a poor one. Um, and so, pointing yourself in the direction of things that work out well for you. If you have longer term, equities are the things that work out best for you. As you age, you want to reduce your chance of losing. And Andre, if you lose 10%, you have to make 11% to get back to zero, right? If you lose 50%, you have to make 100% to get back to where you started. So not losing is, and I've not seen any research about this. It seems to me it would make sense, but certainly many investment advisors talk about not losing versus just gaining. So
mm.
I have a question for you, if I may. You mentioned yesterday when we were preparing three things that influenced you a lot, and you don't have to remember them. I wrote them down, or you may remember them. But the first was the the impact that unexpected events have in life.
Mm.
Things that, and I don't want to. I want to make sure to give you a chance to describe it. But you talked about interest rates going up and inflation and some contact you had with friends and things that happened to
Mm.
people back then, and how that impacted your thinking about personal finance. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I mentioned the early 80s when inflation was very high and interest rates on mortgages, for instance, were extremely high. I think at one point I remember a friend of mine, I was in Ottawa then, I was living and working in Ottawa then, and a friend of mine had to renew his mortgage, and the interest rate was 21% for 5 years. I mean, 21% is a lot of money.
It's like a
And
credit card.
right, exactly. I don't remember what credit card rates were at the time, but anyways, 21% for a 5-year mortgage. So, I mean, he could not afford it, right? And he was someone in his 50s who had had a good job for, many years, but he just simply could not afford it. And he had to sell the house. So that had a lot of influence on me because I mean, inflation at that level was not expected, and it was a period of stagflation. There was no economic growth. Inflation was very high, and it I mean, I
High
was,
inflation being the combination of high interest rates and high inflation.
that's right, and no growth,
And no,
and no economic growth. And I was not really affected at the time because I had a small apartment in Ottawa, and I didn't own a home. But what happened to some of my friends really struck me as meaning that you never know what's going to happen. And who could imagine 5 years before that interest rates on a mortgage, 5-year mortgage, would be as high as 21%. And I mean, if you want to imagine what it looks like, someone today who just, for instance, the person who bought my house in the Montreal suburb with interest rates at 5%, imagine that 5 years later, the interest rate is 21%. What impact would that would have on the payments, right? So that made me very careful and always think that, things can happen that will change your financial situation completely, and therefore you have to be extremely careful if you take a mortgage. Imagine what would happen if the interest rates were 5 points higher. Imagine what would happen if you lost your job, even if though it appears like you have a good job. Who knows what's going to happen. And I was in the media, and at that time the media were in a very prosperous situation, and look at the media today, right? It's extremely difficult even to get a job and to hold it, to keep a job. And so that made me very, and the other thing I think I mentioned was the um, the financial situation of the Canadian government at the same time, where public debt was extremely high, and the government had to cut expenses drastically, with impact on jobs, good jobs. Again, these were good government jobs, but people lost their jobs, and it was by the thousands. And the Canadian government was warned that if they didn't do anything, they'd be considered a financial laggard in the financial community, international financial community. So they had to cut important social programs. Unemployment insurance was cut, and so on. And again, that made me think that if a government, a large government, I mean, Canada obviously is much smaller than the US, but still a large OECD member country,
sure, still large government.
yeah, can be put in that situation. Certainly an individual can also find themselves in that kind of situation,
And
and
this ties,
therefore,
so what
yeah,
I
sure.
thought of when you mentioned this yesterday in our preparation was you mentioned, in combination with the way you introduced yourself today, you've got a cultural background where debt was considered maybe um, reckless, too
Mhm.
much debt, already in an environment where you're not talking so much about money. One
Mhm.
thing I liked when I worked in Manhattan, I was out of grad school, an investment banker, and I always enjoyed how there was always information on the street. You just went out to get lunch or went out to get a cup of coffee or have some drinks after work. And, any other city, they're talking about movies or hiking or travel. And in New York, they're talking about interest rates and leasing versus buying a car or renting a home versus owning a home. And that's what people talk about in Manhattan.
Mm.
And I always found that stimulating. And frankly, it accelerated my financial IQ. But so you find yourself in an environment in which, you know, um, being maybe aggressive financially was not part of where you grew up. You found yourself in journalism, particularly reporting on governments and things like that, and were probably very involved in tracking what was happening with the debt levels of. So that I take it that had some influence on the way you ran your personal financial life.
Yes, and another factor is a personal factor, but I think it's important to keep in mind was I thought that, and again, maybe that's cultural, but I think it's more personal. I thought very important to be independent, right? Financially independent, uh, from my parents, from friends, from banks, from if you're independent, financially independent, even though you're not wealthy, um, it gives you a lot of leeway, and there's a lot of things that you can manage to do if you're independent that you can't if you owe too much money to different people who in a way have control over parts of your life. If they loaned you money if you owe them money. So there are limits to that. I mean, I couldn't buy a house cash. I obviously I had to take a mortgage. But again, that's so. I mean, if people are looking for examples of someone who aggressively manage his money or our family money, I'm not it. But and again, I think in your first course that I followed, I learned lots of things. And I thought, gee, I should have learned this when I was 25 instead of 65. But
Did anything that I teach coincide with what your financial advisor tells you?
yes, I'd say most of it.
I hope some does.
Yes, no, it does.
You said he was prudent, so I hope that you're also learning things you find prudent in my course.
Yes, well, I think the simple idea of having more knowledge and being more systematic. Part of your one of your courses is on, and your book is on writing a resume, right? And your approach to that is based on a certain number of principles that are very based on experience, and that, I mean, I've written a few resumes in my life, and I never had that approach at all. I just wrote it, like we learned at university, which was, just what you studied, where you studied, and so on, with no really plan as to how you impress the person who's supposed to hire.
How do you get the information off the page quicker?
Exactly, right.
Right.
Which is something I never did, and it
and the
makes
thing
a
is,
lot of difference.
yeah. And you clearly, I mean, I also, I make a joke, if you're Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, who's now deceased, but all you need is a piece of paper that says founded Microsoft. That's sufficient. Or, founded Apple. That's sufficient. But
Yeah.
for most of us, even people like you with distinguished careers, it helps to put the important things, the big things, the things you want people to know in places where they'll see them.
Yeah.
And I had the good fortune of, always interviewing well and having job opportunities. I'm much better, I think, at finding jobs than I am at advising people how to become CEO. I haven't figured out how to do that so easily, but I have figured out how to help people be seen and get jobs and get noticed. And it's a lot like an ad. I think, did I do that with your class, Andre? I use a magazine and I show,
Oh, yes, you did.
Yeah. And I ask people what they saw. So
Yeah.
I'll do this. I'll take a magazine like this and I'll go, what do you see? And I'll close it instantly. And they almost always can say, well, it's a black car. And I'll say, what kind? They'll say Audi. I'll say, do you own an Audi? Let's say an undergrad. And they'll say, no, I own a junker. I say, how do you know it's an Audi? Even this is like a non-car person. They say, well, I recognize the rings. But the point is, the people who write these ads are expert at getting attention. It's placed in a place on the page and it has not much writing and it's designed to attract your attention. And anyway, some of the resume ideas that you allude to are influenced by that kind of technology.
And I'd say it's important when you're young, because obviously people don't know you, but it's also important when you get older, because people will, of course, you have experience and things like that, and in some cases you're a little known, but people will wonder, why should I hire this person who is 64 and at the end of their career? I don't see myself at the end of my career, but still. And why should I hire this person rather than someone who's 35 and has all the energy and so on? So the challenge is still there, even though, at least in my case, even though I'm 64, I'm still writing resumes from time to time. And I learned a lot from your course and from your book. Very helpful.
Well, it's kind of you. Tell me, Andre, when 10 years ago, 11, when I first started teaching personal finance, when we do the retirement chapter, which is in the 4th module that you haven't taken yet, and 10 years ago, people would say, well, retirement means you stop work, you play golf. Somebody would make what they thought was a comedic response, say, well, you play shuffleboard or bridge. And increasingly, though, interestingly, as the years have progressed in the last few, more and more, it seems young people view, these are people now who are 30, 40, 50 years from retirement, view retirement as a more active endeavor. And I have to say that I've gone from making jokes about shuffleboard and golf to saying my hope for retirement is to work less and make more money. I enjoy financial advisory. I enjoy teaching. I like writing. You and I talked about writing. You've written many more books than me, but we both agree it's a grind. It's a solo, hard job. And yet, the fruits of your labor is very satisfying. I enjoy speaking and teaching. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind take a few moments and just say what you're planning to do the next 10 years.
Mm.
How long do you want to continue to work? Where will you spend your time?
Yeah, I've never seen myself stop working and play golf. First of all, because I'm a terrible golfer, and second of all,
Well, I think it's just because you don't play enough.
yeah, right. And so, but I no, I can't see myself stop working, but I can certainly see myself working differently. In a context where there's a bit less pressure and you don't have to go to the office every day and be stuck in traffic or whatever. So I can see myself working differently on different things and have more choices as to what project I will, move forward with. And that's why financial independence is so important, because if you have healthy financial situation when you get older, you can envisage retirement in a way. You retire maybe from your day-to-day job, but you can have other kinds of projects which are very active, important projects. Like you mentioned writing. I writing is a sort of a need for me. I need to be writing and researching and things like that, and I think I do it reasonably well. Well, I have many ideas about writing projects, but I just don't have time. So, I can see myself working very hard, but in a different context. And financial independence is essential to achieve that. If you don't have that, you don't have that choice. You have to continue on your day-to-day grind. And to me, there's a newspaper here that runs artist stories every week on people who are looking for a way to retire, and they should follow your course, I guess. But and you can see that it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to figure out how much money you need, how much you will spend in this new situation. Do you have enough savings? If you don't, can you work part-time or as a consultant, for instance, or things like that? Um, and of course, the healthier your financial situation, the more choices you have in front of you.
I found too, Andre, and there are two things. You gave me a chance to make one point just a moment ago, and I'll get to that in a second. But the first one that you just gave me is I also think physical health impacts your mental health. And I have both my parents unfortunately are now deceased. My mom passed in 2014. And at that time, I was visiting her on the weekends for about 2 years' time. And I was getting old and fat quickly. And as much as I love the time we spent together, we watched, the Baltimore Ravens win the Super Bowl together. It was fabulous to do. We had this wonderful time together. But she passed, and my wife bought a gym membership for me, and I'd had them, but I'd not really, as a middle-aged working person, I would get on a bike and read a magazine or look at the news, and that was all I did. Well, I threw myself in and started taking classes and lifting weights. And I'd always lifted weights before the seasons of sports seasons, but 2 months or 3 months before a sports season, and then it ends because the season begins, is not enough. You have to kind of stay with it.
Mm.
And what I found is better physical health, I hope, is going to give me the chance to stay active and vigorous mentally as well for a longer time. And
Yeah, it's very important, and that's one of the reasons I want to slow down with work is I want to be able to get into shape. I'm taking some medication because I have problems with my back, and the medication made me gain about 30 pounds.
Ah,
That's one of the side
ah,
effects of this medication, and there's just nothing you can do. I mean, yes, there is something you can do, but the medication itself, it's a side effect. It's a well-known side
yes,
effect, and there's no alternative to this medication. So, and I have to take it because if I don't take it, my back is so bad I practically can't walk.
right,
And so, but I need to get back in shape, and it's difficult when you as you know, I mean, to integrate this into your a heavy work schedule plus the MBA plus other things, and that's one of the things I want to do. If I slow down a bit, to be able to either lift weights or go to the gym. There's a gym nearby where I live now, and go to the pool, swim, whatever.
yeah,
I don't have, well, maybe I should find the time, but I just can't find the time to do this now.
yeah.
And of course, it's essential to getting old and having fun. If you're healthy, that's the best scenario, of course.
I try and tell myself when I'm not in the mood and I just go anyway because I'm convinced from what I read and what I see from thinking people that showing up is 80% of the, even if
Mm.
you can't do, even if you have to work around something, you know, something sore, as you get older, I certainly always have something that's bothering me, right? I have to work around it, but that helps. Just showing up is often helpful. The other thing that you gave me the chance to do is, here's an example. I get a lot of these, right? This is a version of the book, Andre, you used in the course with me. And I really believe that these kinds of things, I mean, this is a business. This is like a franchise. There are four authors now. I've spoken to Melissa Hart, the newest of the four authors. And they add to this, they produce slides and tests and all kinds of material related to it. But this is the learning that you mentioned. And what I try to encourage people to do is to learn basics, learn how to understand what diversification means, learn what rates of return mean and volatility and budgets and how these things can be used. And but what adds to it is blogs and podcasts and discussions, and maybe you go to a cocktail party unrelated to personal finance. It's for the people who live in your neighborhood, or it's former colleagues or Canadian politics, or who knows. And somebody says, well, I'm doing X, and you say, well, what do you think interest rates are doing? Or, oh, why what's happening with inflation? And for all the pluses and minuses of online media is terrific for personal finance. You can't all believe everything you read, but this is like the discussion. This is like the discussion in Manhattan, that used to happen when you go out at lunchtime. Now you scroll through Twitter or Instagram or something, or whatever your online social media is. And
So every day, as a journalist, I love newspapers, obviously, and so
yeah,
every day I read 6 or 7 newspapers and the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and I read all sorts of stuff on things that you know are not useful to me daily, but give me the information and provide some knowledge so that when I talk with my financial advisor, we can really discuss, right? I'm just not only dependent on him. I can challenge what he tells me. Obviously, he's much more knowledgeable than I am, but still, we can have this discussion.
I
And
think, Andre, that's critical. You don't want to be a client who's like this.
no, that's right.
You want to at least be able to troubleshoot your situation, ask questions. And you're a journalist, or in politics. He's a financial advisor. Let him do what he does well, but know enough so that you can ask questions and understand what he's recommending for you.
Mm. Yeah, I find financial advisors, there are many sorts of financial advisors, of course, and many philosophies, but in my case, I find, although I appreciate the work that he does, he also has a tendency to stick with what he does without really challenging his approach ever, right?
Mm,
And so I, as a typical journalist, I ask a lot of questions and I challenge his approach, and it makes me more comfortable once I've challenged him and either look more into in depth on something, or so I spoke about my mother's financial situation. It's as one gets older, it becomes I mean, I'm now challenging. I'm now managing her financial situation, and I feel it's a huge responsibility. Not because there's a lot of money, but because it's her money, right? It's
Because you
not
care
mine.
about your mother.
Yes, exactly. So
I know exactly what you mean. Not only is it a financial responsibility, but it's an emotional responsibility.
exactly.
I get it.
Yeah. So I challenged him, my financial advisor, who also advises me for my mother, on many things like interest rates and how much stock she should hold when at that age and so on. And I find this very useful. So what I read in the although I'm not trained as an economist or whatever, I find this information extremely useful to have an idea of what the context is, and the information that, because they read these business newspapers, right? They get a lot of information from other sources, but they also read these newspapers. So it puts me it gives me some common ground with my financial advisor, and I'm not totally dependent on him.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the great thing about personal finance, as a former investment banker, I did corporate finance, and I always, as an agent for someone else, thought, why can't this just be about me? Personal finance is about you, right? And not only that, but personal finance. So when Villanova University, I was teaching financial statement analysis, which is an investment banking kind of course, and they said, would you be interested in personal finance? And I don't know if this is true, and I know it was offered by finance PhDs earlier, but I assume they were asking me because it was too pedestrian for the finance professors. Now I know that anyone with any finance professor can teach it, but the thing is, personal finance is accessible to anyone who's intelligent and curious, and you don't have to be even wealthy. All you have to do is learn some basics, ask some questions like you're describing, I think. And you've obviously been around business and governments, and so you've, I'm sure, absorbed plenty. In the interest, Andre has promised that I keep to the time. We're very close, and I have one final question, if it's all right with you, which is something you mentioned. The third point you mentioned in our prep yesterday, which is that you said you always saved and put money aside. And what I've come to realize is everyone would like to do that, but to be disciplined for the long term is not easy. And I related to you the this area of study called behavioral finance, and the very quick. There are many examples, but one of the first is in a group of 50. Let's say you ask, who's an above average driver, put your hand up, and when you count them, 40 people put their hands up, and soon the group realizes that there's something amiss here, that 40 people out of 50 think they're above average drivers. There are many other great examples that the founders, among those Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, came up with. But I think those are the reasons people's inability to make often the best decision for themselves financially. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts about how you stay disciplined, how you and your wife work together on this for 41 years. Um, you know,
I found one of the best tools was simply to have a small part of your salary automatically put into whatever savings account, or because
Automatic withdrawal.
that's right, so that you don't ever see that money really. It just goes there in a savings account or investment account. And so it's $50 a week or $25 a week or $50 a month, or really. But I found this a very, very helpful tool, because you tend to you forget that this money is there. You don't ever see it really. And so we did that from very early on, a small amount put aside automatically. And with time, this money accumulates, and again, with compound interest and reinvesting dividend, with time these amounts become quite significant. So I found this a very helpful tool to be disciplined. uh, but again, it's also, I guess, it's I mean, I was always concerned about things going bad, losing my job, or inflation going back to 20%, or so I felt safe if I had a bit of money put aside automatically, and seeing this amount grow a little bit, uh, I felt I was ready for the bad days when they came. And so, I mean, it's not a systematic or scientific approach like what you teach, but it's sort of it's a rule that I gave myself, right? And with the right tools and with an advisor who can help you even in early days. I mean, for instance, having a financial advisor, I thought was extremely helpful. To have these discussions, to have someone who's more knowledgeable, but whom you can really discuss with, and they know much more than you do. They have ideas, they can help you. So you have to find the right one, the one who fits with your I'd say philosophy of life.
Yeah.
Uh, but once you find the good one, a good one, it helps you being disciplined. For instance, when there's a panic in the markets, and people tend to sell when there's a panic that sets in, and that's the last thing you should do. And just speaking with your
Selling at the
advisor.
low price.
Exactly. So I mean, I don't know the percentage of investors who do that, but I know it's a large percentage.
Well, that's a behavioral finance thing right there. You know,
Exactly right.
I remember quickly, I remember a family that I got to, they were clients, and I didn't do the investing work. I was doing the estate planning and the insurance related work. And they had a trust with assets in it. And the trust assets went down, went down. This is 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And finally they said enough. And they told my colleague, their investment advisor, that's it. We want to go to cash. We can't take any more losses. And they turned $12 million into four, and they went all to cash. And what happened in 2010, 2011, 2012, the market came back, and it's probably back to where it was. It probably exceeds now where it was. But the point is my colleague was saying, take half. Don't take it all and move it to cash. Take half. Has your risk profile changed? No. Have your life goals changed? No. The market is bad, yes, but it should. We can't say for sure, but history tells us it will come back. And
This graph that shows how the market has evolved since 1910 or whatever.
26, Ibbotson, Roger
Yeah.
Ibbotson. Yep.
So I mean, it's fascinating. Whatever happens, whatever crisis or crash there is, after a while, it always comes back and comes higher and higher and higher. So I mean, unless again you're 95 and the crash happens when you're 95, and you can't afford to wait for obvious reasons. But unless that's the situation, you're just again, a financial advisor help if he's good or she's good. They're going to help you not panic. And
That's their job, is to keep you from jumping off the porch
right,
or out the
exactly.
window, or however that statement goes.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, what we found with our quote unquote strategy is that if you stick, since interest rates have become very low, if you stick with, you know, blue chip dividend stocks, I mean, even when the market falls, unless if you have good stocks in good companies, you still get, 5-6% dividend, which
By
is
the
much
way,
higher than the US.
what's your financial advisor, even you don't tell me, and you don't look like an investor that has a need for income yet, but what he's telling you, I think, by saying buy dividend paying stocks, is buy solid blue chip stocks. The
Exactly.
growth company stocks that might earn you more generally don't pay dividends. And so he's
No.
basically telling you buy value oriented, stable, large company stocks.
Yeah,
And if you're
exactly.
reinvesting, it's just like owning them without necessarily wanting the income stream. What you want are solid, growing companies that are consistent.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the approach. And I found, at least in my case, that it worked. It worked okay, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's it.
Andre,
I
anything you want to share with us before we wrap up? Anything cross your mind? Anything I didn't ask you or that you just like to leave with us?
no, I certainly don't have any advice for anyone, because I think, my approach was nothing very original. But um, I find that the more knowledge you have, the better it is. And even though I did not have a lot of knowledge in personal finance, I always read a lot on it and on business and on economics and so on, to try to have a better sense of what's going on in the world, which has an impact on my personal financial situation. And that's why I took your course. I just wanted to improve my knowledge. And that's why I'll take the other courses also, because I want to, for instance, on retirement, that's where I am now. And
Module
so I,
4.
module 4, I'll get there. I'll get there.
Andre, one thing that's great about, so if you enjoy teaching, I was an undergrad, as you may know, an undergrad engineer, and I was a very good student my first 2 years, but not so my last two when I was doing real engineering. And what I found though is I was much better at describing complicated things than I was at designing them. And to this day, I enjoy teaching because I enjoy interpreting things and understanding them. Even and sometimes the more complex, frankly, the more fun it is. And interpreting it though in a way that helps people understand them. But in addition to that, in teaching is getting to meet neat people. And so for that, I thank you for joining me today. You were very quick to agree, and it's been my great pleasure to get to know you. And to have you, it's what makes teaching fun, is having interesting, thoughtful people in your courses. And so for that, I thank you, and thank you for doing this today.
Well, thank you very much, and you're a very good teacher. So I'm anxious to take the other modules of your program.
Well, best of luck unpacking all your boxes, and and I wish you the best. Stay well, and I look forward to seeing you again soon, Andre. Thanks, and take care.
Thanks very much. See you again.
Yes, take care.
Okay, was that okay?